our executive directors, Mary Margaret Earl and Monique Vale, to introduce the event.
Thank you so much, Quintana and Edwin. So happy to be here with my colleague, Monique Marshall-Veal, and we are so excited for this very special community conversation, which is the last community conversation of this season, and we are going out with just on a high point. Again, I'm Reverend Mary Margaret Earl. I'm the executive director of the Unitarian Universalist Urban Ministry, and the mission of the Urban Ministry is to work across race and place to dismantle racism and white supremacy culture, and to advance racial and social and economic justice. We operate a shelter for domestic violence survivors, run a workforce development program for trauma survivors, offer after-school programming for Boston High School students who are running this evening's show. And we live into our mission through the arts and culture and lectures and gatherings like tonight's webinar. So welcome to this special evening. And Monique, would you like to talk about community conversations?
Sure. Welcome, everyone, and a special welcome to our RYP young people. So proud to have you all hosting tonight. My name is Monique Marshall-Veal. I'm the special director of special projects. I do know my title.
Wears many hats.
Many hats, but officially director of special projects here. And I have the pleasure of working every day with Mary Margaret and some amazing folks on our team. We started Community Conversations about 2 years ago, and the Community Conversations highlights the history, the art, and experiences of Black and Indigenous people of color. These conversations provide an opportunity to raise awareness around some of the issues that continuously plague the residents of color in Boston neighborhoods. These conversations have provided information on how to support organizations in the community that are doing the work to help people of color. And it is our hope at the Urban Ministry that in the coming year that we continue these conversations virtually and in person. So please stay connected to us to find out about upcoming conversations. Lastly, thank you for joining us this evening. Mary Margaret and I are so excited and so appreciative that our young people and their leadership have stepped up to present the final community conversation for this season, Gang Violence Without Silence. Thank you again for joining us.
Every community conversation is sponsored by one of our member congregations. So the Urban Ministry has 46 member congregations, UU congregations around Greater Boston. And we're always so proud and appreciative for their support and sponsorship. And we're happy to share this commitment minute from one of our wonderful member congregations about why they're supporting this evening's discussion.
I am Reverend Erica Richmond, the acting lead minister of the First Parish UU congregation in Arlington, Massachusetts. I am delighted to be announcing tonight's program. Our racial justice and social justice committees here at this congregation are hosting the UU Urban Ministry program for this evening. This is Gang Violence Without Silence, a chance for those in Roxbury to reflect on the daily impact of violence in their communities. What excites me most about tonight's program is that it's youth-led. Nothing is more powerful than hearing directly from folks who are impacted by issues. In fact, that's exactly how it should be. As someone who grew up in the Boston area and was involved in much youth activism in the area, be that teen empowerment or the Haymarket Foundation, I know firsthand how important it is to listen to youth voices, not only because we will be blown away by their wisdom, but it also gives them a chance to find their voice in a world that desperately needs to hear it. I really hope you all enjoy tonight's program, and we are thrilled for our continued commitment to the UUUM.
And in the spirit of that wise message of stepping aside to make sure that young people can share their voices, their wisdom, and what they have to offer. Monique, this is a unique evening. You and I are going to step aside and out.
Yes,
and
we are.
we are so happy that the young people are going to take it from here. So
Absolutely.
thanks, young people, RYP students, and thanks everybody for tuning in. And we're looking forward to watching with you.
Excellent.
Take it from
Thank
here.
you. Take care, everyone.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alexis, and as you know, today's community conversation hosted by UUM is about how gang violence affects our communities in Boston. The youth program chose this topic because it is something we are very passionate about, and we see it as something prominent that has been occurring in our community for a long time. The video I'm about to show is an example of just how long gang violence has been an issue in Roxbury. This spoken word poem is an excerpt from a documentary called This Ain't Normal about gang violence surrounding Roxbury. You can play the video.
We're dealing with a situation some could say they fall victim to without contemplation. You say that these cats really love these gangs, and I say, you know what? You got to be mistaken. See, cause I don't know no cat from Humboldt, man, who enjoy the things should he call the bang bang, because he's just trying to overstand, damn, when can me and my people eat, fam? It's hard in this land. And if I walk down the block to Grove Hall and I'm looking at Adidas Park, that old school wall, because you know what? Interville is still there. Hold up, beware, because MIC, they ain't going nowhere. Magnolia, Interville, Castlegate, whoa, Columbia Road, whoa, can somebody hear? You see, there's pain in this atmosphere because there is no economical growth in my land, and I'm looking at all these abandoned apartment buildings and I'm saying, damn, because on this day and time, some folks are really blind to what's going on for me and mine. And down in OP, they still not eating. I mean, they got a whole bunch of new buildings. How about the new school that Manino built? But damn, I'm still feeling all this type of guilt. Why? Because it's like giving folks cereal with no milk. Do you understand what's contemplating, or should I say going on in this land? But now today, I'm sitting and I'm wondering, does anybody really care about what's happening in this atmosphere?
This poem touches on themes that resonate with the youth program, such as the metaphor giving cereal with no milk. We found the metaphor very powerful because it connects with the struggles Roxbury deals with, like not being given enough resources to provide for young people. I hope this video can give y'all context as to what today's community conversation is about. Now I'll pass it on to my colleague, Adilson.
Thank you, Alexis. Before we start our community commercial, we're going to do a quick icebreaker. So I'm going to ask you guys your name and where you're from, and I want y'all to put it in chat. So to answer it in chat, click everyone in the chat drop down menu to respond to the icebreaker. Wow, we have a lot of people from different areas here. So that's cool. But now I'm going to pass it on to Edwin. He's going to ask you our final question for the icebreaker.
All right, it's just my head, but has any gang violence impacted your lives at all from where you are? If you want to answer that question, you can put it in the chat. If you don't want to answer, it's totally okay. I find it interesting that some of you guys, some people are saying that it affects them at their work, not at their home. Some in, well, all over the country, some in particular places like Los Angeles, and most, well, around the schooling system with their students, which shows that gang violence can affect anybody, anywhere, and knows no bounds. Okay, thank you guys for your answers. We're gonna take this short moment to play a commercial.
Hello, my name is Cassandra Campbell. I am the co-founder of Fresh Food Generation. We are a farm-to-plate food truck, catering business, and restaurant. The majority of folks who work with us live within walking distance of the neighborhood, and we think it's really important to grow within. We opened up about 8 years ago with a food truck in the Dudley Square neighborhood. It really started with a mission of increasing access to healthy, affordable, cooked foods in my own neighborhood. I was born and raised in Roxbury, and I wanted to see healthier options that were delicious and good for you. Please stop by the restaurant. We have outdoor seating, and we have a team that loves to put love into the food.
Okay, and with that, we'll pass the mic to Isabel.
Hi, my name is Isabel, so I'll be introducing some of the polls. One of the poll questions that I have are, how long do you think gangs have been around in America? And some of the answer choices are 1776, 1822, 1930, and 1985. And I'll give y'all some time to answer the question. Okay, so the answer to the question was gangs in America have been around since 1822. Another poll question that I have is, why do you think gangs in America were created? And the choices for the question are resistance and protection, anarchy, overthrowing the government, survival to feed themselves and their families, community, and sense of belonging. And I'll give y'all a minute to answer that. So the answer to that question was survival. And some background on it was there was not much housing available and very few jobs in the 1820s. So people had to turn to crime in order to survive. Mostly Irish and Polish people who were poor. They found safety in numbers, leading them to band together and form gangs to survive. Later on in the 1960s, racial anti-Black violence on the part of white youth directly contributed to Black youths forming self-protection societies that transformed into Black gangs by the late 1960s. And the last poll question that I have is, how many gangs do you think are in Boston currently? Some of the answer choices are 3, 10, 90, and 160. And I'll give y'all a minute to answer that. All right, and the question to this last poll was, there are 160 documented gangs currently in Boston. And that will be it for my poll questions. I'll be passing it off to Maya.
Okay, now that we have reached towards the middle of our community conversation, we're going to be going on break. Take this time to rejuvenate, and we will be returning back onto the community conversation at 6:30.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. It is now 6:30, and I will be introducing the part 2 of the poll questions. I'm going to start with my first poll question for everyone. Why do you think people join gangs? The following options for this answer is abandonment, seek for validation, money, sense of community and belonging, and peer pressure. So the answer to that question was a sense of community and belonging. According to the organization Your Life Counts, the main reason why people join gangs is to have a sense of community. And this is just a question to ask the audience, but the part 2 of our question was, how can we invest in our own community so that the sense of belonging can happen outside of gangs? And anybody could put their ideas in the chat. We'll be happy to read them. Okay, so now that I'm seeing everybody put their ideas in the chat. I'm seeing a lot of good ideas, like the first one, having community programs and events, sports leagues, arts, music, all these other ones. Create alternatives where food and activities foster community. These are all good ideas. But now I have to move on to the next question, the next poll question. And the next question is, are gang members predominantly male or female? I'll give you guys a moment to answer this one. Okay, the answer to this question is males. Okay, so one of the excerpts I'm about to read is explaining why it is male. And it starts off with male, predominantly men of color, 67% Black, non-Hispanic men in Boston, which has led to many young men of color being racially profiled in Boston schools. The ACLU sued Boston police in 2018 to gain access to their gang member database to see what was going on. They said, what we see is a pattern of youth being surveilled inside their schools and outside their schools, in their neighborhoods, and being labeled as gang members, often simply because of the people they're being seen with, and sometimes the clothing that they wear. Orlando, a former student at East Boston High School, was labeled a gang associate by a former Boston School police sergeant, a separate department from Boston Police. The teen, an immigrant from El Salvador, had no criminal record. It was on track to receive a green card when he was involved in a lunchtime scuffle. And that was just a piece of an excerpt from a website, basically, that was on an article of how um, men of color are basically profiled within schools, specifically within Boston. And yeah, I'm now going to pass the mic on to Wintana.
And without further ado, I would like to introduce our wonderful panel for tonight. Joining us is Chris Allen, our RYP coordinator, who helped us learn more about and discuss the issue of gang violence in our neighborhoods. Roydell Miller, one of our own RYP interns, who will share his experience as a young person living in Roxbury. And the two people joining us from Louis D. Brown Peace Institute, Pace McConkey Jr. and Marcali Bursey. The Peace Institute was founded in memory of Louis D. Brown. Quote, Lewis was caught in a fatal crossfire shootout near his home in Dorchester, Massachusetts in December of 1993. During that time, there were no resources in place in Boston for survivors of homicide victims, and Lewis's family left the hospital empty-handed and empty-hearted. I will now pass it to our panel speakers.
Thank you, Wintana, for passing the mic. One of the questions we have for the Peace Institute, first we'd like to say hello, good evening. And basically we just, we kind of, want a little insight of, what it's like working in the Peace Institute and how it relates to what we're discussing tonight.
That's a great question. And before we talk about the Peace Institute, just want to acknowledge the great evening so far from you all. Stimulating conversation and questions, and really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this on behalf of the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute. Just to speak a little bit about what the Peace Institute offers, we're a community organization that's located in Fields Corner, Dorchester, Massachusetts. But we serve families all across the city of Boston, all across the Commonwealth. One of our focuses, our main focus, is to serve families and individuals that have lost loved ones to homicide. Acknowledging that after the loss of a loved one, or loss of a friend or a neighbor or a community member, that there can be a lot of needs that arise. And the Peace Institute is here to hold families and support them through those challenging moments. And acknowledging that not all homicides come from gang-involved activity, but gang violence is a factor that we deal with at the Peace Institute, as far as the individuals that lose their lives. And then also sometimes the retaliation that comes when lives are lost. So the Peace Institute is a place that fosters peace for those individuals that have lost loved ones, but also a place that tries to foster peace collectively across the city. So we're here bringing a little bit of that peace from our collective, from our community, and sharing it with yours and receiving it vice versa. So thank you. And it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Okay, so the two questions that I'll be asking are directly to the Peace Institute. And one of the questions that I will be asking to you are, what was your upbringing like? And then how did it affect your interactions or lack of interactions with gangs in Boston?
I can go first. Hi, everyone. My name is Marcali Bursey. I am the Network and Policy Fellow Intern at the Peace Institute for the semester. I work directly beneath Pace and the Network and Policy Director, Danielle Bennett. And thank you for having us. And I hope that we act as good ambassadors of the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute tonight. So to answer the question posed by Isabel, so from personal experience, I am not originally a Boston native, nor am I a Mass native. I am Haitian. So I'm originally from Port-au-Prince. But then I think I lived a very sheltered existence, at least before we came over here. And so I did not really get, I was not close. There was no proximity to gang violence where I grew up, but I acknowledge it as something that is kind of a plague to my country now. It's not just regional anymore at the moment. It is something that has grown to kind of envelop the whole country. Any news about Haiti, especially over the past couple of years, has been just gang violence growing rampant. And we can think back to when there were some missionaries that were captured, and that was also a result of gang violence. So though it does not personally or directly impact me, it is something that is very evident. And I think if you talk to any Haitian, even if they've not had direct contact with gang violence, anybody that has family over there, my father is over there at the moment, will tell you that a great concern of those who are here, the diaspora of the country, is gang violence. So though it's not something that's personally impacted me. It's something that I think we as a community kind of carry on our back, regardless of where we are in the world. I want to pass it on to Pace if he has anything to add to that.
Thank you, Markali. Yeah, so to introduce myself too, my name is Pace, and I'm originally from Maryland. So I was born and raised in Maryland. And to answer that question as well, gang violence is something that impacts the DMV, the DC, Metro, and Virginia area quite a bit. And the first time I saw the impacts of gang violence was at a high school party. I was 16 years old, and I was on the basketball team at my high school, and all of my teammates were there. And a friend of mine was assaulted with a knife. And that was something that totally startled me as someone who grew up on another side of the community that didn't necessarily see that on a day-to-day or hear that, on a week-to-week. But there it was in front of me. And later we found out that one of my teammates, the one impacted, was getting involved. And that was the first time that I really saw the impact of that. Growing up on the white suburban side of that neighborhood, it wasn't necessarily anything that impacted me directly, but saw that experience and had that experience with friends, and seeing how it impacted my friends, their family, and the trickle effect when people are impacted by violence, which is something that the Peace Institute really speaks to, acknowledging that when people are impacted by violence, it's not only that individual that receives a direct impact, but also those that are around them, their friends, their family, their teammates, their coworkers. I'm acknowledging that it has a collective impact. So that's a little bit about me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your response. That is really touching, and I'm very glad that you felt comfortable enough to share that in this space. And the last question that I have, well, personally that I have to the Peace Institute is, what are your personal experiences with gang violence?
I can piggyback off, similar to what I was just saying. But also want to uplift a moment that when I first moved to Boston, I'm a social worker by my background, and I was working in one of the city hospitals. And one of my jobs there was to work with families and individuals impacted by community violence and homicide. And I would offer counseling and different things there. And that was a really important time in my life to be able to sit with individuals and families impacted, and to learn from their experience, but also brainstorm together what safety can look like and what healing can look like in communities and neighborhoods and households where some of that safety is robbed. So that's, when I think about my experience, it wasn't necessarily directly involved with gang violence, but serving and working with families and individuals that have been impacted.
I can add just a little bit to what Pace had spoken about. I'm fortunate enough to not have had any personal experience with gang violence, or anything remotely close to that. Um, I do reside in Brockton, and it's known for being kind of a violent-esque city. And I don't know to the extent of which gang violence is the violence that I'm talking about when I think I've seen violence in my city. But definitely just when I went to BHS Brockton High School, just being aware that um it's people that you're close to, friends of yours that are in the classrooms. And I think a lot of what happens is that we tend to villainize um people that join gangs. And as we have learned, and the rest of the attendees has probably learned from RYP, that people join gangs for a sense of community, for a wide array of reasons. And so I think typically we just cast negative thoughts, but there are people that we care about, and there are people that are sons, nephews, and friends of yours that you're walking down the halls with. And so the extent of my interaction with gang violence is just probably just understanding that it's not something that's theoretical, it's not something that's out there, but it's something that could be like right next to you, regardless of whether you choose to acknowledge it or not. I hope that helps the conversation.
Well, thank you for sharing, both of you, for sharing deeper into your experiences with gang violence. And now I will be passing it off to Lily.
Good afternoon, y'all. I hope y'all are having a wonderful day. The next question I have for targeted toward the Peace Institute would be, what change do you notice in Roxbury?
Just to speak a little bit to that, at the Peace Institute, we serve families impacted by homicide, community violence all across the city of Boston. We also acknowledge that violence is sometimes focused in certain areas. Dorchester, we speak Dorchester a lot because that's where we live. But Roxbury is another one of those communities. And one of the treats and blessings of working with the Peace Institute is thinking of remedies of how we can combat violence within our communities and how we can uplift the gifts and positive experiences that exist within our communities. And we see that in Roxbury. Roxbury is a community rich of beautiful history, of gifts and talents, visionaries, and Roxbury has that history. And sometimes the dominant narrative specifically highlights the negative attributes of Roxbury and other neighborhoods in Boston, like Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, Hyde Park, Rosendale, that often or sometimes have higher levels of violence in other neighborhoods in Boston. But I think it's really important, and the Peace Institute sees it really important, to uplift the gifts and the unique powers within those neighborhoods. And I see that in Roxbury whenever I pull through Roxbury and I meet with families or meet with other organizations and sister organizations within the city found in the Roxbury area. It's apparent that those strengths and those gifts are present. And when those things are uplifted, I think a lot of positive change can come of it. So just want to uplift that beauty.
So now we would like to hear from the other panelists and how y'all feel like what change do y'all see in Roxbury?
I'm Ray Dell, I'm RIP intern, and the changes I've seen in Roxbury regarding gang violence is, well, in the recent years, Roxbury has been getting pretty gentrified. A lot of new, like, higher income households moving in and all that. But when the warmer months come and people are outside, kids start acting up and things go down. And so I would say it's been getting a little better because of the gentrification going on, but I wouldn't say that it's um like the solution, because I go to I've gone to Boston public schools my whole life, and like the kids that are running around doing things they aren't supposed to do, I technically I congregate with them, I go to school with them and all that, and just like the changes I've seen is just like the culture too a little bit, but yeah, I'm just as I get older, I notice these things a little more.
Yeah. Good afternoon. My name is Chris Allen. I'm RIP coordinator. One of the changes that I've seen is the social media use with a lot of the gang violence. A lot of these things actually play out online. I think previously, because phones and cameras weren't in such heavy use, late 80s, early 90s, mid 90s, but with the camera phone and all these social media networks, a lot of these things are actually playing out online. So it's unfortunate. So a lot of people actually getting a closer front seat to seeing what's actually happening, as opposed to just hearing about it, or if a news camera just happened to be there. So I see that that's one of the biggest changes. I think a lot of the same type of crimes are happening. It's just that there's just so much more access to be able to see it, and people are seeing how, unfortunate it is, seeing it with your own two eyes. It's different from hearing a song and then you see a video with a song. So we're actually seeing young kids and witnessing, not just reading the news clip, but actually seeing the video of what happened. So I think that's one of the biggest changes.
Thank you all for sharing. Those are some very good perspectives. I will be moving on to the next question. Our next question is, what do you think are some ways we can end cycles of generational trauma from the aftermath of being in gang violence?
I think some of the methods, having frank and honest conversations. I remember coming up, the youth programs I were in, they actually brought ex-gangbangers, sometimes still current, to speak to the youth. And just that blatant, honest truth of the reality of being in that lifestyle, what it leads to. I think there's a fine line sometimes where it gets glamorized in videos, social media, songs, et cetera, lifestyle. But, the end result is, usually not positive. So I think that if we keep pushing that message and we get to youth early that, there is another way that you can live your life. You don't necessarily have to be part of a gang, because a lot of people do it in terms of, it's like a second family, or sometimes a first family to a lot of the young kids out there. So just understanding that, if there's another avenue, another way that you can figure things out, I think that can start to help to break the cycle.
technology.
Does the Peace Institute want to add on to that question?
I'm happy to share a few thoughts. And one of the things that we focus on at the Peace Institute is acknowledging that there are a lot of systems at play that contribute to violence. And there are systems of oppression that impact people and entire communities of people. And we see a symptom of that being violence and gang violence. So one of the ways that we can combat that and we can try to change the outcome is to offer systems that support people and that sustain people and sustain communities and can foster peace. Some of those being around our essential needs, things that everyone needs to live and to strive and to thrive, things like housing and food security and economic security and jobs and education and all these things that people need, right? And the Peace Institute helps connect families and individuals and survivors of violence, and survivors of homicide specifically, to those resources. We have peace curriculum at the Peace Institute that helps foster new ideas, and like Chris says, know that there are other pathways, other options, and helping connecting individuals and families to the resources that can make those options feel realistic and real and possible. And I think, just like Chris is saying, to trust that there is other options and that's possible. And there's a place that you can go to access some of those things and begin that journey, not only by yourself, but in a collective, within a family, within a community, is something the Peace Institute really strives to do.
Thank you for your feedback. We really appreciate your responses, and I will now be passing it to my colleague Maya.
Hello, everybody. For the last two questions I have today, my first question is for Chris. And the question is gang violence more prevalent in Roxbury than other areas of Boston? Why do you think that is, and how can we change it?
In my opinion, I think there's gang violence across the whole city of Boston. Roxbury is kind of like a center hub. So to get to downtown Boston, in the various parts of Boston, at some point you have to pass through Roxbury. So you may have individuals who may be involved in activities and they may just happen to be in the Roxbury area. So some of those numbers may be skewed to look like there may be more crime happening in Roxbury, but it's really a citywide issue, in my opinion. I mean, just the even us being here on this panel, our program was started based on a young man who unfortunately lost his life. He sought the help of the church here before we were after school program, and he was killed not long after. He actually tried to recruit and bring his friends to get help. So Funderburg After School Program, which is now Roxbury Youth Programs, is a product of that. And it's right here in Roxbury. And it's continued today. We have Funderburg Scholars. There's a lot of positivity, that's related to that. But again, I think crime, it's across the city. But Roxbury is like our Harlem. If you go to, it's like Los Angeles. It's like the center, the center hub where everyone passes through. So I think it's a citywide situation.
My last question, first I would like to say thank you, Chris, for your answer, and thank you for sharing. We really appreciate it. And for my last question I have and I think this is the last question from all of the panelists. And this question is for Roydell. And the question is, what factors come into play that influence a teenager to affiliate themselves with gangs?
I would say mainly that it starts at home because, you know, I feel like we need the young people that actually need help should be targeted because, there's people with, they may not be economically stable, they're not going to school, their family might be involved in gangs or they got parents who don't care, who aren't taking care of them, they're smoking, and just where they are could influence like what they do and what activities they take place in. I just think that it's important um, that we target these young people so they can get the help they need because the resources exist, but they'll never get them if they don't, or if the right people don't get to them first. You know what I mean? Like, um, Chris was talking about before with that young man. Like, he found help, but it wasn't soon enough. So I think that the factors that are mainly just it is that like what's going on at home, who's guiding these kids, what's influencing them, and once you have the root of the problem, then you can go from there.
Thank you for your response. I'm going to be extending this question, asking any of the other panelists the same question. Like what factors come into play, or what factor you think come into play that influence the teenager to affiliate themselves with the gang? And this question is open to the rest of the panelists to answer as well.
I'll hop in. I think a lot of it goes with trying to impress your peers. I've seen certain crowds who have gravitated towards people who are into that lifestyle. And so that kind of feeds into the ego saying, okay, well, this means I must be doing something right. If I'm a young man and I'm able to get all the girls because I'm living a certain lifestyle, you think that's the routine and the pattern that you should do. It also comes from just having true friends and people around you being honest. I mean, because someone's doing something that's getting themselves in trouble, someone who's real with you will say, hey, man, listen, this might not be the lifestyle for you. This is what I chose to do. And I think a lot of that has to come from, when we talk about generations, if it's, we'll say, older people who are in the gangs, because a lot of these gangs, they date back to the 80s. And it's, sometimes it's families, sometimes it's people from the same neighborhood, whatever, who kind of pass down this, baton in such a way. But if the message is passed down from the older generation to say that, hey, listen, we live the same thing, we're doing the same things you guys are involved in. 3 of us are doing 15 years. Someone else has lost their life. Someone's mother's car was shot. And these are things that, I've heard about and seen myself. Just being honest with that next generation that, we've been there and done it before, and, you may want to make a different situation. I think that would be very key to helping change this influence. But on the flip side, is people have people they look up to coming up. We want it to be their parents, and hopefully the parents being good role models, but a lot of times it's the person who you're outside hanging with. And if you're in a neighborhood and people are 4 and 5 years older than you, and they're embracing you because you're doing certain activities, that feeds your ego. And you think you're doing what you're supposed to do. But it takes a real one to say, hey, listen, you know what? You need to stay away from this. You don't need to be involved with this activity.
Yeah, I just want to uplift, what I'm hearing from Chris say, the impact that people can have in the lives of friends and family. When there's someone that you trust, that you can go to and receive that honest, that feedback and guidance about life. I worked as a counselor and as a therapist. Not everyone feels comfortable talking with a therapist or with a counselor or, mental health professional, doctor, whatever it is. And they seek that guidance from other people they trust, from friends and from teachers, from mentors. And I just really want to uplift the power that those individual conversations can have when you're pulled aside by someone you trust, and them helping you see the value in your life and the lives of those around you, the lives in your community, that those conversations can be so impactful. Because I think ultimately, yeah, people want to feel connected. People want to feel like they're part of something. And when we foster relationships that are healthy and peaceful and edifying, those are the relationships that people gravitate to. And hopefully that will, help shift the direction when people are faced with the choice going one way or the other way, that they can gravitate towards those possibilities of being in a peaceful community that values their life and celebrates their gifts, and sees them as an essential person, an important person in that community.
Thank you for answering my question. That brings us to, oh yeah, questions from the audience. I don't want to cut this too short because I still want to hear like other people's response because I'm very intrigued from this conversation.
To reiterate what Maya had said, if you want to put, yeah, just like some of y'all put the questions in the chat and then I'll ask the panelists. So can one of y'all say more about Operation Ceasefire?
Yeah, I personally don't have information on Operation Ceasefire. There's Boydell here with me. I don't know if the Peace Institute can add to that.
If none of y'all have any like comments to the Operation Ceasefire, I'll just ask the next question. And another one.
I have a reply.
Oh,
so Operation Ceasefire is a problem-solving police strategy that seeks to reduce gang violence, illegal gun possession, and gun violence in communities. Good job. Crushed it.
Another question is, this question could be for anybody. It could be directed to the Peace Institute and also could be directed to Rodell and Chris. What is the response you would give or advice you would have for people for when people do only focus on negative aspects of the neighborhood, like Roxbury, Dorchester, etc., how it's tied up into racism and discrimination?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Unfortunately, when 4, 5, 7, 25, etc., the cameras are rolling, it always seems like there's something negative happening in the city. But just us being here on the Zoom and discussing different methods of staying out of that lifestyle, I think if we focus more on this, it would give the city a little better look. I mean, we can't be ignorant to the fact and say that nothing happens, because that'd be turning a blind eye. But I think there's definitely more people on a positive note in the city than negative. And I believe there was something about racism and discrimination tied in. I think that that definitely plays a factor. People are stereotyped, unfortunately, based upon beliefs, what you hear, and a lot what we'll see on TV. And I've lived in Boston all my life, and there's been a lot more positive days than negative. And I'm sure that even you guys are asking us the question, but you guys can also say, probably seen some things happen, but your days more or less are positive than negative here. They're not, we don't live in a complete war zone, unfortunately, like what we're seeing happening, on CNN and the news now. There are a lot of good areas, good programs like this, and then others that are positive.
Another question we have in the chat is, how can better schools keep you studying and looking to the future?
Can you repeat the question?
To repeat the question, how can better schools keep you studying and looking to the future?
I think they meant like.
Oh,
looking
like how
forward.
how can they keep schools like focus on studying and looking forward to the future?
I'd say for schools, for one, they gotta be better funded, because if you want students to be engaged in class and to learn and like want to like work towards their future, you gotta have those things in place to where they feel motivated and they feel like they're working towards something, not that they're just in class sitting there thinking about what's going on outside. Because like in city schools in general, I can only speak for my experience that, my middle school, Timothy across the street, I didn't do anything special over there. There's a lot of trouble kids I went to school with, and some of them are not in such good places now. I feel like that's because that at school, the resources weren't there for them. We had class and that's it. There was nothing in place for those at-risk kids. So, yeah, I guess that's the thing about schools. We need more effort towards the troubled youth.
All right, another question that we have in the chat is, do you see connections between community violence and domestic violence in the home? Would ending domestic violence affect community violence?
I'd love to speak to this. When I mentioned earlier, I was working in one of the city hospitals doing some work supporting patients coming in impacted by community violence. And our center also worked with individuals impacted by domestic violence and seeing the intersections between those two things. And I think it's important to acknowledge where violence stems from. And violence in many cases is a symptom, it's a product of of systems of oppression impacting people. So I think it's important when thinking about domestic violence and community violence as something that intersects, that are products from a similar source of oppression, similar sources of violence. So just want to acknowledge that systems of white supremacy, predatory capitalism, other systems that are in place that directly impact people and create violence as a symptom, as a product.
And probably the last question would be, could you say more about what support should have been there for those kids?
I guess, truthfully, like, they, for those kids, they needed guidance, first of all. Like, you know, like there needed to be, I don't feel like there was an adult in that school who was willing to step up and set the example. So I feel like that's the number one thing, is like, it could be all the funding in the world, but you need someone to guide these kids on the right path. And I think also one thing that would have helped would be like more of a school culture, so they have more of a sense of belonging at their school, instead of going outside and hanging out with like bad people. Because I don't know, because my school, my middle school at least, didn't really have any like sports in place or anything like that, or after school programs, or at a minimum, like there weren't any good ones that I could remember. And yeah, so I feel like just more programming and more adults that are willing to step up for these kids.
Thank you for answering that question. To answer this question on like my behalf, something I could say, like, resources that could be there for like more kids as well, is basically like tying to like what every panelist has said like within this meeting, which basically ties to just starting at home and having parents provide like a moral compass, and just providing support and all types of just like emotional support, and basically guiding them onto the right path and things of that nature. And basically like not just having emotional support too, but having safety within the house. And even living in like a environment like Boston, where you could like basically like, what's the word, witness like a lot of violence. I feel like parents, just like Chris said, it all starts from home, and it starts from how we teach the next generation, which is like the children. So that is one of my answers. It is now 6:19, almost 6, oh my God, 7:19, almost 7:20. And I'm going to be passing the mic to my colleague, Wintana, and I'm going to be closing the panel. Thank you all for participating, the questions. My mistake, I'm passing it to Isabel. Hopefully people don't.
All right, so, and that concludes our panel. Can we just show some love in the chat to our wonderful panelists? So I very appreciate y'all for answering the questions and giving the audience answers to many of the questions that they are having, and many of the questions that RIP was having as well. And now I will be passing it to Adosin.
Thank you, Isabel. So first, I want to shout out our panelists for being such great speakers. We really appreciate it. I have a final exciting announcement. We have some gift cards here from Black-owned businesses in Nubian Square that we would like to raffle out to a few lucky participants in the Zoom call. So first, we have three $25 gift cards for Deli Cafe. The winners of the $25 gift card to Deli Cafe are, and I'm sorry if I pronounce your name wrong, Deb Ferenz. Congratulations. Carla Bayer and Pat Brewer. Congratulations to y'all three. And next, for the $50 gift cards, these the jackpots right here. Goes to Cindy Soley and Stephanie Brown. Congratulations. If I pronounce y'all name wrong, we're gonna put it in chat for y'all. And yeah, if you want a gift card, you can come pick it up at UU Urban Ministry at 10 Putnam Street in Roxbury during opening hours. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat and we can help you. With that being said, that's a wrap. Thank you all for coming out today and supporting Roxbury Youth Program. We really appreciate it. Have a great night, everyone.